What is up, everybody? Thank you for joining me for another One Piece video. And today I want to try to figure out what the best arc in One Piece is. And to do that, I'm going to rank all 31 of them, 31 through 1, and see which one is my favorite. So I'm going to quickly go through all of them and just talk about some things I like about them, some things I may not like about them, and why I think one might be better than the other, and see which arc is my favorite in One Piece. So starting off at 31, to no surprise of anyone, we have Syrup Village. Syrup Village is one of the only arcs in the series that I think really drags and only has a couple of redeeming qualities. One of those qualities being Captain Kuro. I think Captain Kuro is pretty interesting. And of course you have the introduction of Usopp, but Usopp, going back and looking at it, I actually think Syrup Village is a little bit better because of the amazing development he gets in later arcs in One Piece, but Syrup Village definitely drags, and I think it's a big reason why some people don't continue with One Piece, because they get to Syrup Village and they're like, is this what the rest of the series is going to be like? And it definitely isn't, so that's why Syrup Village lands at 31. And then at 30, we have Long Ring, Long Land, an arc that really bummed me out when I was reading it. It's kind of fun. It definitely is a step up in like entertainment value versus Syrup Village, but I think it goes on for way too long, and it's sandwiched in between two amazing arcs, and it's really where One Piece starts to take off as from a good series to, one of the best series I've ever read, in between Skypiea and Water 7. The big thing about this arc that I love is the introduction of Aokiji at the end, but other than that, it really, there's the fun moment where Sanji and Zoro have to work together, but really other than that, I think the arc is really forgettable, especially for when it comes in the timeline. Oda isn't figuring out his style at this point. He's starting to perfect it, and this was a big step back for me, and it was just kind of frustrating when I read it, so that's why it's at number 30. And then at number 29, we have Orange Town. Orange Town is another arc, it's the one right before Syrup Village, and it has the introduction of Buggy, and I think it's a fine arc on its own, but also I do think Oda hasn't really found his footing yet, and there's just a few things of, it kind of goes on for a little bit longer than I feel like it should, and Buggy, for as interesting of a character that he becomes really later on in the series, then he's just kind of okay. He has a great introduction though, and with him sitting on the chair is awesome. So there's a few things I like about it, but also a lot of pirates with Buggy are really forgettable, even if Buggy himself is really cool. And then this is where I think the jump up is. I think the low 3 arcs, you can find a lot better stuff and a lot of other long-running shonen, but I think outside of those 3 arcs, everything is better than average compared to your typical long-running shonen series, especially in the manga. So even with these rankings, I love all of these arcs. I love One Piece, but we gotta see which one is the best. And so at 28, we have Whiskey Peak. This arc is memorable for introducing Vivi and really starting the Baroque Works saga. It's kind of nice after you get into, it's the beginning of when you're on the Grand Line, but for as good as I think Reverse Mountain and the few episodes that it has does at introducing us to what the Grand Line is going to be, I found Whiskey Peak to be didn't quite live up to the standard of what the Grand Line could be and what it became not long after that. So it's a fun arc. I definitely enjoy Vivi and just kind of learning about the Baroque Works and kind of the interesting island there and how they get everybody drunk and then take them out. And so it's a fun arc. It's it's in Alabasta that has some pretty incredible stuff in it. So I think 28 is a pretty good spot. And then following that up with number 27, we have another arc from the Alabasta saga, and that's Drum Island. Really, the main reason it's a little bit lower than some other arcs on here is I think it just went a little too long, but there is a lot of great stuff in Drum Island. You have Chopper and Chopper's backstory, which are both incredible, and you have, the race to save Nami when they climb up the mountain, you know, and to bring Nami to the doctor. Really liked that, but there were some aspects of it that were a little forgettable. It went on just a little too long, especially when we were leading up to the climax of Alabasta and all the greatness that has to offer. And so I wanted to leave it sooner than we did. So that's why it lands here towards the bottom of the arcs, but still a lot of great things, especially with Chopper's introduction. Then at number 26, we have Punk Hazard. This is the first arc on the list from post time skip, and really I think in comparison to other arcs post time skip, Punk Hazard struggles, because I don't want to rank these arcs in, you know, only completely on isolation, but where they are in the story I think matters. And Punk Hazard, while, you know, it's of a similar quality to Fishman Island, it pales in comparison to what led next with Dressrosa, and then everything after Dressrosa really, and the couple arcs before it. It's just kind of sandwiched, you know, in a tough spot where there's a lot of great things. Everything with Law is amazing, but Caesar really is just okay, I think, as a character. Not a character that I'm particularly fond of, so as the main villain, Caesar fell a little flat. I think Caesar gets better later on when Caesar isn't the main villain, but more of just like a gag character, and so that's why Punk Hazard is 26. Then at 25, we have Loguetown, one of the first ones on this list from East Blue, and it does a lot of really cool things. It introduces us to Dragon really subtly, introduces us to Smoker, and it's just a nice, fun little separation from the action and kind of like a send-off for the Grand Line. The reason it's not higher on this list is at no fault of anything that it does. It's just not long enough. It's a very short arc, and so I felt to compare it to some of the longer arcs, it didn't quite stand up. It doesn't have quite as many great moments, but it is perfect at what it does. And so it would be higher if it was a lot longer and stayed to that quality, but it introduces some really important characters, and obviously it's the town that Roger is executed in, so really important for it thematically, and a nice send-off from the East Blue to the Grand Line. Then at 24, we have another post-time skip arc, and that's Fishman Island. I know a lot of people were very disappointed in Fishman Island, and I thought it was a little bit better than Punk Hazard, obviously, but of a similar type of quality. It was really just nice it was kind of cool to see Luffy after, you know, he goes through such low moments through the Marineford saga and the War saga, to then see him and the entire crew just be so much stronger than everyone else was really cool. I love the world building of Fishman Island, and I think thematically it had a lot of really interesting perspectives on how we view racism, and so for those aspects, I put it where it's at on the list. It would be lower if it didn't have those thematic elements, but it's not higher on the list because some of the villains are a little disappointing, and it does drag on a little too long. Then at 23, we have Reverse Mountain. These last four I all view in a very similar way. Reverse Mountain introduces the greatest character in the entire series in Laboon, and it is really cool to see them enter the Grand Line, and it's just such a great moment for the insane buildup we get from the East Blue now to the Grand Line. So again, it suffers from a similar problem from Loguetown right before it, and that is because it's not very long, but everything we got there was awesome. Then at number 22, we have Return to Sabaody Archipelago, and this was really good for a similar reason that Fishman Island is, to have, you know, Luffy kind of be back and seeing the crew together was such an amazing moment, and really it gets this high on the list because of Luffy just dodging everything and seeing the insane jump he has made, and him returning to Sabaody Archipelago, which is another short arc that is going to be pretty high on this list. But again, it's not long enough. A lot of these ones a little bit lower, they just needed a little more length to compete with the big hitters, but there's nothing wrong with Return to Sabaody Archipelago. Overall, really fun and just nice to see the crew back together. At 21, we have another shorter arc, and this is Jaya. Jaya has one of my favorite panels in the entire series, the People's Dreams panel with Blackbeard and then Nami, Zoro, and Luffy. It has the introduction of Blackbeard, who is one of my favorite characters in the series. If you watched my top 50 characters in One Piece that was released earlier this week, but it also has Bellamy, a character who is really annoying when he's first introduced and then later becomes a great, even better character. So it really leads into Skypiea in a great way. You also get a hint at Doflamingo and Kuma. So this was a nice arc after Alabasta. You know, Robin's now part of the crew, but it's after Alabasta, and it really feels like the Straw Hats are now going to start making waves with the entirety of the world. They're not as isolated as they used to be, and that excitement was, you know, really great. And it also, I just personally love Jaya. It's one that I remember really fondly, so that's why it's here at 21. Then at 20, we have Little Garden. I think Little Garden is what I had hoped Drum Island in Whiskey Peak would be. Just a lot of fun, really interesting world. It didn't go on for too long, but it went on long enough to give us enough of what this island is. And I love the giants. They introduced the really interesting wax power. And you get the hint that, of course, Sanji is a prince here. So it really starts to build up the mystery of Crocodile and Baroque works and what are they, and it has a really, really cool island, and it felt like, okay, now we're really in the Grand Line. I really started to feel that once we hit Little Garden. Perfect pacing, I thought, great length, and that's why it's here on the list. At 19, we have to bring it back all the way to the beginning, Romance Dawn. Romance Dawn is only a few episodes, but it is a great arc at establishing who Luffy is, who Zoro is, and I love the backstory, Luffy's original backstory at the start of the manga with him and Shanks, and then you know, I love when Zoro's introduction and you get the moment where Zoro tells Luffy which direction to go, which is, you know, kind of the scariest thing in the entire series almost, because obviously he never knows where he's going. So that is, you know, you have to respect how it starts, and it starts off really well, even if the next two arcs, Orangetown and Syrup Village, do stumble a little bit. At 18, we have an arc that I think people would put a lot lower on this list, but that's Amazon Lily. Amazon Lily I thought was really good for, you know, it's right after one of the most monumental moments in the series with everything that happens at Sabaody Archipelago, and now Luffy's on his own for the first time since Romance Dawn. And I really like Boa as a character, and I love how hockey is played at Amazon Lily, where everyone there has hockey, and the idea of that island is really interesting and expands why someone would become a warlord. We see that even more with Jinbei later on. So I think Amazon Lily is just a lot of fun. I think it went on for the perfect amount of time. It would have got a little tedious if it went on longer, but if it was a little bit shorter, I would have felt a little cheated not learning more about this island. So that was really great, and I think it's right around the middle of the pack for all of the arcs, but obviously super good, and Boa is one of the best characters in the series. At 17, we have another post-time skip arc, and that's Zao. Zao is awesome for, you know, the change of pace after the length of Dressrosa was a much needed switch up. The island that Zao is super cool, that it's just on this like elephant that's just walking the sea forever, and I love the twist that we get on Kinemon and Momo, and the fact that Momo is royalty really builds up Wano really great, but also launches us into Whole Cake Island with Sanji leaving. So everything about Zao is a lot like Jaya. It's a perfect kind of filler between two big arcs that gives us something we can get invested in, adds more to the world, and sends us off to the next arc racing. So I really like Zao, and I think a lot of people do enjoy this arc. Obviously, again, it struggles to compete with the longer arcs, but was a much needed break from Dressrosa. At 16, we have Baratie. This is where Sanji is introduced, and I think it's one of the better arcs in the East Blue. I love the concept of, you know, this ship that is a restaurant where pirates can come, and I love the different philosophies of the cooks here. Obviously Sanji, who's willing to serve anybody, but if they disrespect him, he'll fight back. And then the cooks, you know, who will only serve the other cooks who will only serve a paying customer. And then you have the introduction of Mihawk here, and this is really where it showed how big the world can be. It really developed Zoro as a character with his fight with Mihawk, and introduces Sanji's two of the stronger crew members, character development wise, and Luffy gets some great moments as well in his big fight. So it really shows us how strong and how difficult of a journey this is going to be if we're only at a restaurant on the sea. We're not even close to the Grand Line yet. So that's why Baratie is at 16. At 15, we have Water 7. Water 7 is awesome. I love the world building of Water 7. A lot of these arcs are set in amazing places, and Water 7 is no different. And I really like the mystery vibe to it. It also has one of the most emotional conflicts in the series with Usopp versus Luffy, and then Robin's turn away from the crew after we've really only spent 2 or 3 arcs with her, and then all of a sudden she's gone and we don't have no idea why, and kind of the flip between, you know, the introduction of Rob Lucci and all of the crew of CP9 is really well done. And so it has this great mystery vibe to it, but also some really emotional moments. But its climax is sent off to a different arc, and so that's why it is at 15 and not higher. At 14, we have Post-War, and this is a little bit shorter, it's, you know, totally really focused on Luffy, but the reason that I love this arc is for Luffy's backstory with Ace and Sabo. It was a much needed backstory, and it delivered on every single front, and that's why it's here. It couldn't be higher because it doesn't have enough to do with the rest of the world, but it was much needed character building for Luffy, and it was awesome to see about Ace, and then the promise of Sabo potentially in the future was incredible. And so I can imagine what it would have been like. What were people saying about Sabo when he's introduced there? Obviously, I kind of knew who he was when I started reading, so I might have had a different perspective on it than some others. But it is one of the better backstories in the series, and I think it handles the fallout of the amazing Summit War perfectly. And so it doesn't run for too long, and it doesn't run for too short. It's, again, perfect pacing for such a smaller arc, and much needed character development for Luffy. At 13, we have the Leveille. This is where the Reverie happens, and really this arc is here just for the insanity that this arc is, introducing such big players into the world and feeling like things are about to change. I have never been, I don't know if I've ever been, when reading One Piece, so invested in such a short arc where I was just flying through it because it was so interesting, and then I had to go back and reread it again because there's so much there. Introduction about who might be the real big bad villain in the series if it ends up not being a character who is, you know, like Blackbeard or someone like that. And so it really redefined kind of where One Piece was going, and it was a moment that's been built up for a while, and it feels like there's going to be real change in the story that hadn't really happened since the Summit War. At 12, we have Thriller Bark. Thriller Bark is just one of the most fun to watch. I love the difference in tone and how it has this horror comedy vibe to it. I actually really like Moria as a character, as I've said multiple times in other videos. I do think he actually had a little bit of missed potential where they didn't really need to change anything with him, but they just could have, you know, expanded on him even more. And so that is why this arc is a little bit lower. This is definitely one of the bigger arcs in the series, and it does feel a little disconnected in between, you know, the Water 7 saga and then the War saga. So it does that little bit of, difference from it, where it does kind of feel like it could have been a shorter arc, even though I actually, maybe runs a little too long, but not too much, because it's a lot of fun there. But, Luffy doesn't really learn any new powers. The big thing there, obviously outside of Zoro's big moment at the end of it with Kuma showing up, is seeing the crew really work together to beat Oars. So Thriller Bark's a lot of fun. I don't think it quite reaches the heights of some other longer arcs that will be up later on this list, but it is certainly a great time, and I just wish it would have been a little bit more connected to the world. But I do love Moria, and I think his power is really interesting, and of course the idea of the Thriller Bark ship is super interesting. At 11 we have Post Enies Lobby, and I think it's pretty easy to see why this is there, and it's because of the Going Merry. That moment enough sold it for me. The introduction of Garp, you see Kobe again. An amazing conclusion to that arc, Frankie finally joining the crew in a hilarious moment. However, not quite long enough to be any higher, but that moment is one of the best moments in the series when the ship burns, and so that's why it is up here at 11. Now moving into the top 10, we have a lot of our really big arcs, and that's starting out with number 10, Alabasta. I think Alabasta did a great job of building up Crocodile as a villain. The politics of Alabasta is really interesting, and we have a really long build up for Alabasta. I think it did get dragged down a little bit, and that's what held it back, and it does lack, I think, some of the complexity that later arcs would end up tackling. There isn't too many moments that really stand out on their own to me, so when I think back to Alabasta, that's why it's not higher, but it really does stamp One Piece, and it's really where you start to see One Piece be able to take on such a huge arc with so many moving pieces. It's the first arc really like that starts to be so much bigger, and then Oda just expands on that later and perfects that with arcs to come. Then at 9 we have Impel Down, and Impel Down I think has maybe the best pacing of any individual arc in the series, and it reintroduces a couple characters, Crocodile being one of them, but also Buggy the Clown and Bon Clay. It has this element of urgency to it that no other arc in One Piece really has, except for the one that follows it in Marineford. And having pacing like that really changed what One Piece could do for me, because that has been an issue with a lot of arcs that came before Impel Down, and I love how it redefined so many characters, and it did such a great job even without the rest of the Straw Hats there, that it makes it at 9 on the list. And then at 8, I think this has got to be the most underrated arc in my eyes, and that's Skypiea. I think Skypiea perfectly represents kind of everything that One Piece is about, and I think it has an amazing villain in Enel, and it has a lot of great moments. Obviously, you have the gong when Luffy hits it, and then you also have Sanji when he shows back up, and he's just like beat up to hell, and it's incredible. It does start a little slow, and that's its biggest knock, but it also has Nolan's backstory, which I also think is super underrated, that redefines the entire arc before it. So it does have a little bit of a slow start, that's why it's not higher, but it's ideas about knowledge and progress perfectly represented in Luffy, Nolan, and Enel is why it is at 8 on the list. And obviously the world is super interesting of the Sky Island. Then at 7 we have our current arc, Wano. Wano is, I love the change in art style that it presents. I love how much buildup we've had for this, with Kinemon being introduced all the way back in Punk Hazard. The act structure is really different, and I love how Oda is able to redefine what One Piece is so late in its run. The reason that this arc isn't higher is just because it hasn't finished yet. I have a tough time putting it over a handful of these arcs because we don't know how it's going to finish. It could drop a little bit. I wouldn't imagine it would drop out of the top 10, but it also could very much be in the top 5, depending how it goes from here. Then at number 6, we have Sabaody Archipelago. This is the shortest arc in the top 10, I believe. And it's all because of the two moments where you think you're going one way, and you think the crew starts getting beat up, and Luffy might have this rage moment where he overcomes everything and unlocks some hidden power, and it just doesn't happen, and he's sent away to Amazon Lily, and that moment is heartbreaking but really important for the rest of the series. And you have Luffy punching a celestial dragon, which is one of the most hype moments and satisfying moments in the series, and it introduces the worst generation, and the world building of Sabaody Archipelago is just awesome. Really unique place. I actually think it goes on for the perfect amount of time. It didn't need to go on any longer, and that's why it competes with some of these bigger arcs that are in the top 10. Then at number 5, we have the final arc, or the only arc I haven't mentioned from East Blue, and that's Arlong Park. Arlong Park, to this day, still, when I think of One Piece and my favorite moments, I still think of Luffy putting the hat on Nami, and I still think of Luffy crushing Arlong. It's a really unique way of the powers and how Luffy is drowning, but they save him by pulling his head up top. And I love everything that it does for Nami. It really introduces Sanji to the crew, and it's when Nami really joins. It's it's the peak of that first 5, right? Because that's kind of, for a long time, that was the crew, and that's the crew that I really grew up with for most of the time. And so just thinking back on Arlong Park, I think he's such a great villain, and I think One Piece without Arlong Park would not have continued the success that it has. But because Arlong Park so early on was so good that it's able to be really helped propel One Piece forward, and so for that it ranks at number 5. Then at number 4, we have Enies Lobby, the climax to Water 7, and it does everything right. I love everything about Water 7. Robin, you get her backstory, and you get the I want to live moment, and the crew declares war on the Marines, and it has the best individual fights, I think, throughout the series, where all of the side characters' fights I found more interesting than Luffy's main fight with Rob Lucci, and that fight is fine, it's not great. I do find Rob Lucci a little underwhelming, and that's why Enies Lobby isn't any higher on this list, but it has a great example of side fights in anime done right, and with it paying off everything done in Water 7, that's what puts it at number 4. Then at number 3, we have Dressrosa. Dressrosa, I think, has the best villain in the entire series in Doflamingo, and really the only slight criticism is there's a few moments where it kind of drags when you're reading it, and that holds it back from being number 1 on this list. But it's the introduction of Gear 4. You get a ton of stuff with Law. Fujitora's introduction is incredible. Sabo comes back. I actually really like the Coliseum tournament. I think it's really, really good, and it's fun to see Oda do a tournament and see how Luffy just has to leave it. And I love the pacing of it, where right when you get there, there's a sense of urgency. Too many arcs start off a little slow, like Skypiea. Dressrosa definitely doesn't, and because Doflamingo is such a well fleshed out character, and you have Corazon and Law's backstory, that's what puts Dressrosa at 3. Then Whole Cake Island is at number 2, an arc I basically consider to be perfect. I think it is one of the top 5 arcs ever, which shows you how much I think of the number 1 arc on this list. Whole Cake Island, though, redefines Sanji, has good pacing, and really the only reason it's not number 1, even though I think it's very slight, is a few of the really minor characters might not be utilized as good, but it also has it has my favorite fight in the series with Katakuri versus Luffy, and showing Luffy's drive. One of the most tightly woven arcs, thematically, and just really showing how Luffy will never get up, and with the moments with Sanji and then later on with Katakuri. And of course you have my favorite panel in the series with Sanji crying, and that moment is heartbreaking. So everything that it does with Big Mom, its world building, I think's incredible. And the introduction of Germa 66, I think if this arc was attempted, pre-time skip with all of the different factions moving, it would have not worked out as well, but Oda was able to pull it off this late in the run, and it's incredible. And the more I think about Whole Cake Island, the more I like it. And of course, at number 1, to no surprise, it's Marineford. I think Marineford's the greatest arc of all time. Maybe the Chimera Ant arc stays with it for the greatest arc in any shonen ever, but Marineford has great pacing. It has everything you would ever want from One Piece outside of some of the Straw Hats not being there. It has one of the most emotional moments with Ace's death, and really everything about Marineford I enjoy. Whitebeard, Blackbeard showing up, and then Shanks has all of these big players we've been waiting to see for so long, and it perfectly encaptures everything pre-time skip and then sends us off to post-time skip. And so it does everything right at every level of the storytelling, and I don't think I've ever had so much fun reading a manga than when I was reading Marineford. And I love going back and reading it again, and it still holds up even though I've read it a couple times now. And so Marineford is at 1, but it and Whole Cake Island I think are really the 2 best in the series. They're both pretty close for me. So that's my list. What are your favorite arcs, and what's your least favorite arc? Maybe outside of Syrup Village. I'm guessing most people's least favorite is Syrup Village. So thank you for sticking with me for this video. If you like my work, go down to my Patreon down below. Follow me on Twitter at AnnieEssays, and I hope to see you in the next one.